Today, we're going to talk about why injustice is inconvenient. Have you ever been so focused on doing something that you thought was the right thing to do that you actually overlooked real needs? There was a TV show that happened in the early 2000s, I believe, and it was called So You Want to Be a Superhero. It was on the Sci-Fi Channel, and it was a show that was produced by Stan Lee, the founder of Marvel. And I was in high school at the time, and I remember that I watched it and I was captivated. The premise was that if you and your persona, your superhero character that you created, if you want, you'd get your own comic book about you and your character. And I loved it. It was so fun to watch. And I remember that in one of the first episodes, the heroes were supposed to figure out how to go and change and be discreet. Think Superman. And as they were changing, they had to run to the end of this huge course, and that was their task. And along the way, what happened was Stan Lee had staged a little girl in distress, and she was crying and she was looking for her mother. And the true challenge wasn't actually to get dressed and to run to the end of the race. It was actually to see which person would be hero-like and stop and focus on the need. And that was the true test. That was the test, was who would stop and see someone who had a need. Much like this TV show, with that certain scenario where doing right was overshadowed, or doing the right thing overshadowed doing the real need, helping a real person in need. It made me think of this Bible verse, Luke 11:42, which says, "But woe to you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and every herb, and neglect justice and the love of God. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others." The Pharisees were so entrenched in doing the right things that they were taught, that they wanted to stay so true to the law that they were ingrained. In Jesus' own words, he says, you stopped doing justice and you stopped working with the love of God, and therefore stopped working in rightness. The thought was, this is the right thing to do, and it wasn't, this is what God would do in this moment. And there's the difference. I'm doing what is right. I'm the hero. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And then there's the running the race. And then there's this is what God would do. This is who he would look after. This is the true hero, the one that stops for those in need. And in a lot of ways, that's how church is today. We get so caught up in doing the right things that we forget to do the true work. I want to set this setting for you of the backdrop that really presents to us why injustice is inconvenient. Injustice, when it occurs, it takes and forces an unresolved oppression into our thought process. Once we see it, once we see this, we have to figure out what to do with it. So yeah, when we encounter an injustice, it forces this unresolved issue into our daily life. And oftentimes where the rub happens is because we, in the USA, one of our guiding principles in a lot of ways is comfort. We We want our food. We want it now. We want it delivered. We want, when we feel down, we want new stuff, shoes, clothes, whatever, and we want it shipped, and we want it shipped in 2 days. We want to adjust the thermostat, but we don't want to stand up to do it, so we want to do it on our phones, and then our phone is charging simultaneously, and it's not charging over there, it's charging here because there's an outlet in my chair, there's an outlet in my couch. We don't want to work for the long haul to reap benefits. We want results now. We don't want to deal with our past traumas. We want to just medicate. Forget months and years of eating healthy and exercising. We just want results now. We want the pill. We want the 30-day plan. Sometimes we don't even want that. We just want the surgery that's going to take care of it for us. We want the liposuction. We want the facelift. We want these things that make us comfortable in our skin now. We don't want to deal with our irreconcilable differences with our spouse. Instead, we want to take our junk and we want to take it into the next relationship instead of dealing with it. We don't want to deal with the trauma of our past. We want to take drugs to escape it. We don't want to face an overwhelming sense. We don't want to face an overwhelming sense of emptiness. We just want to knock down some alcoholic beverages to numb it for us. We don't want to deal with our emotions. We want a donut and a latte. The American pursuit of comfort. We want these comforts in our life. We don't want to deal with issues. We want the ride off in the sunset with nothing that we have to change internally, externally. You have an issue? Sorry, I don't care. I'm too busy being comforted in my world. And this is why whenever something is forced onto our plate, injustice is inconvenient. Because it forces an issue into our daily rhythm of pursuing comfort, and we don't like it. So what exactly is injustice? Well, quite literally, definition-wise, injustice is whenever justice ends. So justice is whenever everything is equal, everything is fair, everything is right. And whenever something tips in the scale to where justice is no longer there, we enter into injustice. Quite literally, when justice ceases, injustice begins. And there's varying degrees of injustice. Some are huge and some are tragic, and some are small and very micro, but they exist. And it forces us to do something. And we typically run injustice through, I want to say, 3 filters. And these 3 filters are just kind of our natural response. I think these 3 filters kind of push us into the place of comfort, or what we perceive to be comfort. The first filter we typically run it through is, what does my news source say about this? What does my preferred news source say about this injustice? The second is, what does my preferred politician say about injustice? And finally, the third one is, what does my social media feed say about this injustice? In all of those, in all 3 of those, when presented with this injustice, which injustice in nature is uncomfortable, it's going to force you to go to a place a lot of us as Americans don't want to go, because again, we like to surround ourselves with that bubble of comfort. When we're presented with those 3, really we're going to those places. We're saying, what should I think about this? And if there's anything that I've recognized about humans, it's that we do things pursuing comfort, but also we do things to get off the hook from responsibility. And I think that's the hard part, is we go to get off from responsibility. And so we go to our news source, our favorite channel, whatever that is, and we say, okay, what do you say? And then they'll spin a story. We'll go to our favorite politician and they'll spin a story. They'll do an empty platitude and slap a band-aid on it. And then we'll go to our news feed and social media. And this is where it gets polarizing, or could become polarizing, or just confirming our biases. But we go to those three things, and then instead of us actually facing injustice, what we do is we let it be narrated out of our life by other voices. And I think that's the rub. Injustice is so inconvenient to our comforts that we look for the first exit and the first person to confirm that it's worth exiting on. And that's not what we're called to do. And then also, some of us might go a couple steps further. We might actually engage a little with the injustice. And what could happen is we could actually ask the question, is this really injustice? And then second to that is this made up? Is this fake? Is this backed by anything? But rarely do people actually get to those two questions. Most of the time, they stay in those first three questions. What does my news source say? What does my favorite politician say? And then what does my social media feed say? Yeah. And I think unfortunately, most of the time, what's presented with us is the way we resolve injustice is we take this injustice and then we write it off. We write it off. We write it off. And then we look for other sources to confirm that writing it off is the right thing, right? So we look for the confirmation bias of what we already have rather than taking a look at it. Then boom, the perceived injustice is resolved in our minds. It's no longer an injustice. My political party or my news source says it's not injustice, it's a false narrative. So let's just write it off. And then boom, we go right back. We're presented with injustice. We say, nope. And then we just go right back into our comfort, into our day-to-day, and we're not shaken at all. And we justify it. There's a few things that we do. We justify the injustice. For example, well, if they just would have listened to the cops, they wouldn't have been shot. And in doing so, we just justify it. Boom. This injustice happened. Okay, great. Now it's justified. We justify it. It's okay now. And then we don't have that issue anymore. Another thing we do with injustice is we rationalize it. Well, yeah, there's starving kids halfway around the world. How in the world will I ever get food there for them? How can I ever help them? That's not my issue. I can't. The scraps on my table, I can't feed them. And then what we do is we rationalize it. We turn our brain off to looking for solutions. And then the third way that we typically write off injustice is we double down in our comfort. We receive the perceived injustice. We run it through the filter of, politicians and news sources and the group think in social media. And instead of actually pausing or taking the time to focus on it, actually what we do is we double down into comfort. And doubling down into comfort looks like this. For example, it looks like this. Well, I've never experienced the receiving end of racism. So instead of actually pausing and considering another experience, what we say is, well, I've never done it. I've never received that. So not only do we acknowledge that we have comfort, we recline back into the seat of comfort and say, well, it's never been my issue. And then, boom, written off. So those are three ways that we negotiate with injustice. We justify it, we rationalize it, and then we double down into comfort. And those are just a few examples, but ultimately all of those are ways of deflecting. Just deflecting from facing things that are scary or painful or hurtful. And the reality is, injustice is supposed to make you uncomfortable. There's a part of us that is supposed to feel like that is unjust, because it is. There's a part of us that when we see another person suffering, that we go, that isn't right. We try to rationalize, we try to double down in comfort, we try to justify it. And in doing so, we actually negate another group of people's issues. And it just forces us to look at another person's pain. This is why injustice is inconvenient. It's inconvenient because it forces us to look at pain. Injustice forces us to look at pain. We can run through the gamut of the mental judo, the mental taekwondo, the mental manipulation to get us into comfort and out of discomfort. But the reality is that injustice, by design, is so inconvenient because there's pain attached, and it forces us to look at pain. In this discomfort, this forcing us to look at something different, is a lot like Stan Lee and these superheroes. Instead of being so focused, if they were to pay attention to the pain that someone was going on around them, that was happening to someone around them, it would derail them from the pursuit of their goals, from the pursuit of their mission. The Pharisees were so focused on tithing a little bit of everything that they forgot to partner and see the love of God and work for justice. Both of these situations, the superheroes and the Pharisees, were so focused on doing the right in their mind that they neglected the need. And for us, and for a lot of us, we justify, we minimize, we deflect, we double down into comfort, we write off based off of what our politicians and news sources say. And we get so focused, just like the superhero, just like the Pharisee, we get so focused on doing what is right by our mind and our schema, the way we view the world, that we forget to do what is like righteous and holy and just. So where do we go? Okay, Matthew, there's injustice out there. Yeah, thanks, we know. Okay, you're telling me to look at it and focus on it. So what is the proper response? It's really simple. My recommendation is to join the PTA. And I'm not talking about the Parent-Teacher Association. I'm talking about pausing. Whenever injustice is presented to us, hit the pause button, sit in that discomfort for minutes, for hours, for days or weeks if needed. We hit the pause button when we're presented with injustice and we feel the weight of it. What if what's presented to us is accurate and is true? And we sit in it, we pause. So we pause, we P. The P in PTA is pause. And then we T, we think. We use this brain that's a gift from God. Pause. Oh wow, there's injustice. Think. What can be done? Is this true? Is this real? How do I work with this? If this is a true injustice, how do I work with it? How do I reconcile this? How do I work for justice? Pause, think, act. PTA. Pause, think, act. Pause. This is heavy. Think, wow, what can I do? If this was my scenario, if that was my brother that was murdered, if that was my family member that was targeted, what would I do? What would I say? How would I respond? And just sit and think. But we know that thoughts don't change anything. We know that thoughts don't change anything. We can pause and we can think, but if we don't act, then it dies on the spot. It's a mental roller coaster, and it's a mental obstacle course that we come to the solution. But if we don't tag our thoughts with our hands in action, it's worthless. So we pause, we sit in it, we think, we reflect, we consider, if it was us, what would we do? And then we act like it was us, like it is us, like it is our daily experience. Injustice is inconvenient because when we pause, think, and act, no longer is it just someone else's issue or problem. Now it's our problem. And as we do this, we join the PTA, pause, think, act. As we do this and we think about what we would do if it was us in the story or the headline, and then we begin to act that way, I think truly, the inconvenience of injustice actually leads us into loving the neighbor as ourselves. And that is quite possibly what is the greatest delights of God's heart, is when his children, whenever his creation, truly get to where they love each other as if we loved ourselves. So injustice is super inconvenient. It forces us to act or to write it off. It forces us to face our comforts and say, I can have comfort, or I can step out of my comfort so that someone else who doesn't have comfort can be comforted. Injustice is inconvenient. Injustice leads and is an invitation to love someone else like you love yourself. That's it. Thank you for watching this video on Brandon Christianity. I really hope you enjoyed the topic today, and I hope to see you soon.